Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing another new fantasy releases wrap-up, specifically the books A Song to Drown Rivers, Of Jade and Dragons, and The Gods Below. As always, I'll have timestamps in case you'd like to skip ahead to any one specific book, as well as links to these in case after hearing about them you'd like to check them out. I'm going to start with The Gods Below. This is the same author that wrote the Drowning Empire series. The first book specifically would be The Bone Shard Daughter, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, at least at some point, if not from me, then other booktubers, or just other bookish people, I suppose. But anyway, so this is a series where the first book was a fantastic genre blender. It did, I think, get to be more fantasy leaning as it progressed. It always was fantasy, but I think it had horror elements and then also sort of the thematic elements that you see in a lot of sci-fi stories. It had all of that present within the first book. And then it got to be more so fantasy as we went on. The third installment of that trilogy, at least from what I've seen, I found that it was a little bit hit or miss for people, but ultimately I still feel like we stuck the landing. It made me really excited to see what this author was going to do next. So pretty much since I finished that trilogy, I have been waiting for what would come out. I was highly anticipating The Gods Below, and I bring all this up because perhaps some of my feelings are me giving this too high of expectations, but also I really tried to remove my own personal hype that I put onto The Gods Below. I tried to remove that from the equation and just really focus on why the book didn't quite end up working for me. And I think a lot of it is actually removed from expectations. I think it was truly how certain things were executed that just fell a little flat. I still, though, despite having there being certain things that didn't work, the things that did work were so good that I'm still sort of considering continuing on with this series. But the things that fell flat to me were really quite big misses. So I kind of have mixed feelings about this one. Getting around to the general setup, you do see that once again we are utilizing different means of perspectives, not just with the fact that there is a cast of characters, but the fact that some of them are first person and some of them are third person, which we did see in the Drowning Empire. And our first person perspectives are two sisters that at the very beginning of the story are pulled apart from each other. The older sister really is trying to get back to her younger sister so that she can be there for her, support her. The younger sister, having been told, I'll come back for you, you do see there is a time skip, and the younger sister has gotten to a point where she believes basically that she was abandoned. And so you're seeing these two characters that have very different views of one another. One of them feels like they need to move on, they need to accept their new life, which has been impacted by the magic of their world, and that's actually playing a role in what separated the two of them. The older sister is doing everything she can to get back to her sister, to a point where she's not taking care of herself whatsoever. I was so gripped by the opening of this, and I was very invested very early on, not just in the emotional stakes with these two sisters, but also the world itself. Very quickly, I was fascinated by humans ended up making a deal, at least from what you can tell, with one of the gods to protect them and save them from the others. And then you see that that god has sort of reigned against the others. And then from there, you don't really know what's happened to a lot of the gods, but there are individuals within their world that are basically like god killers. They say these other gods that anything they say is a lie, and there's this one true god. There's also this magical force basically that sweeps the land. When it does, it means that some of the population that it makes contact with, some of the people will die. And then the land itself will sort of take the life force and energy from the people that have died, and it will then put that into the land, and it's restoring the planet in a sense. And then the humans that did survive will be impacted. And you see that this is the thing that separated these two sisters. I was hooked. I thought this was so fascinating, so cool. I really felt for these two sisters. It sounded like I said fell for. I wasn't like, oh, they're so dreamy. I especially the one that thinks she's been abandoned. You're like, no, your sister's trying so hard to get back to you. So I was in it. And then we branch out, we get some other perspectives, and I was also like, okay, this is interesting, this is cool, I'm liking this. You get one character who is a part of basically like a disgraced clan, and they're trying to restore both financially and also just the status in general and the reputation of this clan. There's the idea that the father, who was sort of like the head, was somebody who betrayed their people, and our main character of that plot line, the daughter, she knows, no, I think that my father was set up. I want to restore his name and the name of our clan. And then you have a perspective that's sort of just descending almost like into the center of the earth. And the reason for doing this is that they're trying to get to this mystical place where the first time that humans sort of made this deal with this one true God, they had this boon granted to them, this wish granted to them. This particular character that is descending down into the earth, they are determined to find that place where they can basically make a wish and have that wish granted, similar to what happened in the past, because their best friend is somebody whose health is deteriorating and they want to do everything they can to save them. This character happens to be related to the other one that has to do with the clan. Then you also get one additional perspective that you gather. I think maybe this is in the past. I think this is going to give us clues as to what's going on with the gods, what is actually the truth and what is actually a lie. And again, as I was getting all these pieces, I'm like, this is so cool. I think at the end of the day, the perspective, which I wouldn't have expected this at all, the perspective of the character just going further and further down was probably the best one, because similar to the Bone Shard daughter, that perspective had this feeling of like survival. Something's just around the corner. It's horror leaning, almost like how certain sci-fi movies make you feel afraid if the characters go onto another planet, or if the characters have something board their ship where you're just like, oh no, it's just like this looming dread the whole time. That was captured exceptionally. I kind of want to keep going for that plot line alone because it was so good. But the other perspectives, I do feel like the progression, while the opening was so good and the first introduction of all of their various different plot lines were really well done, I felt like at some point we sort of jumped in a way that made it feel as though, and I don't mean a time skip, which there is a time skip in the story, but I do feel like at some point it felt as though the time that we were taking to develop things, that sort of died out. And then I don't even just mean world building, because there is this impression of, you know, like we have to walk everybody to what the world building is, and here's this place, and here's how everything works. I don't mean in that sense. I mean the development between characters, the relationship building, motivations, those sorts of things. I really felt like that started to just sort of get lost, or you could almost say accelerated at such a fast pace that I no longer really cared. And it felt like a whirlwind because I was so invested initially, and then it got to a point where I suddenly I didn't really care about what the characters were doing, how their plot lines were progressing, the other characters that they would start to have bonds with. There was one character in particular that they sort of joined this ragtag group who they're trying to they're almost like a rebel group, I'll call them. And I was like, am I supposed to care about any of these people? Because I couldn't tell you one from the other. I didn't care about them at all. There is a sort of love interest within that group for the one character, and I was like, I don't know basically anything about them. And then it felt like that romantic plot line, suddenly the characters like really cared about each other, but then maybe, whoa, wait, hold on, but this is way different from what you told me before. Have they actually betrayed me? And I'm like, I don't know, who cares? Because we're not spending any like time developing. And then the other character who's trying to there's a few other characters whose plot lines kind of intertwine. And they intertwine very quickly, which I didn't actually mind. There is sort of a almost like insta-love with some other characters, and I was like, okay. And I didn't, it's not that I didn't care from a standpoint of like, I actually love insta-love. It wasn't like that. It was that I do feel like there was this sense of almost like instant attraction, and that can be realistic. Sometimes characters and real human beings end up meeting somebody and they get along really well right off the bat, and that progresses really quickly. That can happen. So I'm not opposed to that. But it was almost the way that they would speak to each other that I'm like, you don't know each other. They spent so little time together, and I remember there being a scene where one of the characters, I don't want to say specifics about the characters because I don't want to give too much away, but basically one character is reading the other character and their motivations like a book. They're basically saying, like, you always do what this person wants you to do or what this group of people wants you to do. You never think for yourself. And I'm like, you don't know them. You don't know them. How would you know that? Like, you barely know. You barely scratched the surface of getting to know this person, and you're digging so deep. You're like cutting them so perfectly and reading them so well, the way a person would if they had a relationship with someone that went back months, if not years. Not we hooked up once and then also we knew each other for like a week almost-ish. The amount of time was so short. And then like you see each other again and suddenly you're like, oh, I know exactly why you are the way you are, was basically this conversation between these characters. And I'm like, what? No, they don't know each other this well. And I'm bummed out because I loved the world. I thought it was fascinating. I loved that one perspective where I'm like, what are we even doing over here with this whole descending into the earth? And I liked how certain things went completely unanswered, but there were certain twists in the story that I really didn't find gripped me that much. I wasn't shocked by. I just feel like certain things weren't really fleshed out enough and developed enough, and it resulted in a very weird reading experience. As I said, don't know if I'll continue with this series. I might kind of keep my eye out when the second book comes out and see what the emphasis for the plot lines are going to be, but this one just felt a little bit like it was not entirely finished. That's kind of what it felt like. But I really don't want that to deter you. If any of what I was saying sounds really good to you, maybe the things that irked me will not irk you whatsoever, or maybe they won't be that big of a deal, or maybe the things that sound good sound so good that they would trump those other things, and then it would not matter whatsoever. And hopefully that is the case for you. As I said, even though I don't think that my expectations were leading me to have too high of hopes with this, there is still a chance that that was a factor. So I just wanted to make that known. But anyway, yeah, this one just ultimately didn't work for me. Anyway, switching now to A Song to Drown Rivers. This one is more so historical fiction with the tiniest bit of fantasy. The setup is that you follow this young woman whose country has been severely affected by another country and their army. As a result, our main character has a lot of motivation to do what she can to basically fight back. She's not somebody who has combat skills, however. All she really has is the fact that she is extremely beautiful. And this happens to catch the attention of someone who realizes that they can essentially train her and gift her as a concubine to the new emperor, and then she can serve as a spy. So she is trained in this, and she is gifted to this emperor as sort of an act of goodwill. And then from there, she is trying to gain information and relay it back, which she is essentially proud to do because she wants to get back at this country for everything they've taken from her. Something I thought was done quite well with this, and actually did result in a lot of pretty emotional moments, is that it wasn't a matter of these are our good guys and then these are the bad guys, so it's really satisfying when the information is being relayed back. It's more so okay, now I'm actually seeing that there are innocent people on the other side, so the information our character is getting could end up resulting in some of these people being negatively affected. And is this going to continue something that we did close the door on? Because while there were terrible things that happened, you do start to see a little bit of information from the other side, and you're thinking, okay, our main character hates the effects of battle, but probably so do the people on the other side, and they also view them as the enemy. So who's going to benefit if we start new again, some other bit of violence, and we enact change that is more so rooted in vengeance rather than in trying to make people's lives better, ensure that peace is truly found, and that people can look forward to no longer having these power struggles that end up trickling down and impacting them. So you have all of this wrestled with. There isn't really an easy answer. Something that can be tricky within stories is to write this in a way that is compelling, because you have one of two things. You have the good guys, bad guys. It's really satisfying when we get information on these people and we really want to take them down, which can be fun, but it's a little surface level and simple. Then you have the other side, which is that, oh, maybe things are more complicated than I realized. But then you have a main character who's like completely dense and they don't consider that at all and they don't think about it at all. And that can be a little aggravating. And I feel like this book did a really great job, more so falling into the territory over here where things are very complex, but it didn't make our main character a complete moron. And some of the decisions that she makes, you're like, oof, yeah, that sucks. And I did really like just in general, the sort of intrigue aspect of the story. I did find the end to be something, I obviously can't go into too much detail because I don't want to ruin that for anybody, so I'm going to be very vague here. But the end went from being like, wow, that was really powerful. Wait, there's more? And then I read a little more, I'm like, this is a little different. Okay, I guess I'll see where this goes. This is going for longer than I realized. All right, I guess that's how it ended. And it wasn't necessarily a thing that I disliked, but how do I word this? So what I mean by it's not necessarily a thing I disliked, what I mean is I don't think it's objectively in any fashion negative how certain things played out at the end. Just utilize something I tend to not love, which again I have to be so vague about. But the ending, I think, is going to be hit or miss for some people. I think there is a certain level of kind of forbidden love and pining in this story that is very well a focus of what is transpiring internally for our main character. I do feel like it's done in a way where it's all about the tiniest little, they barely maybe looked at one another in a moment, or they said something and the tone of their voice maybe was slightly different than how they usually speak. It's all like really subtle little things, and that sort of is within the character. And also, while the character's aware of it, there's also this resistance to it and a lack of confronting it. And if you like that kind of pining in your stories, I think that you'll be very satisfied with how that played out within this. Last for today, we have Of Jade and Dragons. This is more steampunk, silk punk, which I actually think is a subgenre I don't have a ton of familiarity in. And I'm actually really excited because for my next A Fantasy Fan Reads video, where I'm going to focus in on a specific genre or subgenre, steampunk ended up winning. Steampunk, gaslamp, and silk punk. It's kind of all going to be in one, as there's a lot of overlap in books that have these elements to them. So I was really excited to pick this one up because I can't wait to jump into that subgenre and just get a bunch of books within that read. And this one was not, I didn't intend to pick it up in relation to that. It just kind of happened and I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I loved the setting. It was one of my favorite parts about this. The setup for the story, though, is that you follow a young woman named Ying, and at the beginning of the story, her father is assassinated. Her brother, who has now fulfilled her father's previous role, which is basically like chieftain of their clan, he is urging her to just let it go, and that now they need to focus on picking up the pieces and trying to be there for their people. This is not enough for Ying. She really wants to get to the bottom of who assassinated her father and why, and likely the answers are going to be found in the Engineers Guild. And this is in a different area. This is where her father not only gained a lot of his knowledge, but also where it turns out he gained quite a bit of a reputation. So she's not only having the opportunity to learn more about the engineering elements of their world, which is something she's very passionate about, she's learning a lot more about her father, not just in his death, but a lot more about his life as well. I definitely found that the setting itself, it was just quite different from what I've typically come across. I think if I had picked this up, especially because it is considered young adult, if I had picked this up as a young adult reader, which in the US is considered 12 to 18 years old, I think I would have been so fascinated by this setting. And I am still, even as somebody who's not within that age range. But for young adult readers in particular, I just feel that there aren't, as far as I know, that many books with this sort of a setting. And it's really cool in that it really utilizes things like airships, and our main character is somebody who's trying to develop technology in a way that can allow her to personally fly, almost like using these gliders. And the technology also allows for this particular city to have a lot more going on within it, as opposed to just like cobblestones and a wood cabin, which is great. I'm all for those kinds of settings too, but it's just kind of cool to see other things mixed in and have it feel like it's right on the cusp of something really extravagant. That said, one of the things it's right on the edge of is developing more advanced weaponry. And that's something that our main character simultaneously feels like she wants to partake in the education that she would get by going to the Engineers Guild and learning more about her father, and also learning more about the things that she's passionate about. And while she's interested in that, she does sort of ask herself, is this for the greater good? And this also becomes quite convoluted with the fact that she sort of has a patron who has allowed her to get into the Engineers Guild, and that person seems to have potentially ulterior motives. So a lot of the book you're asking yourself, is this person good, or are they actually going to be an antagonist? Part of the reason our main character even needs a patron is because it's very difficult to get into the Engineers Guild. Second, she is a young woman and only boys or young men are allowed into the Engineers Guild. This person who happens to end up backing her knows her true identity, and they're willing to help her succeed in disguising herself and continuing on at this school and going through these trials without having to worry about all of the other little day-to-day things that would come with potentially being discovered as a girl rather than a boy. I do think that the somewhat sort of school setting and trial setup of the story is once again another reason why, if I had picked this up as a young adult reader, I probably would have really connected to it, because the level of, I have such a passion for these things, but also just because I have a passion for these things doesn't mean I love everything about how we are being taught about them. And also, am I going to be rewarded for thinking outside the box and being more creative, or am I going to be punished because I didn't quite follow the rules or didn't quite follow the prompt? And also, on top of all of that, our main character is still ultimately trying to pinpoint why people were targeting her father. So there's that additional layer of stress. The first part, though, that I was talking about with the school sort of setting, I think is something, of course, a lot of young people can certainly resonate with. And I do think it allows for us to consistently have the next thing that they are having the plot pushed towards. So it does create, I think, good pacing. And when you have this sort of school setting, by having there be something else in addition to it, it doesn't get overly redundant, because you have the emotional grieving process, but also attempts at justice that the character is pursuing. You have the fact that there are other people that maybe are now after her as well, because they went after her father, so now she's in danger. So you have those things. You have whatever's going on with her patron. You're trying to figure out, are they good? Are they bad? And then you have the school stuff on top of everything. So I just felt like it had a lot going for it that I really, really enjoyed. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a new favorite, as I wasn't emotionally invested necessarily on the level that some of my favorites make me emotionally invested, but I'm certainly interested in picking up the sequel and seeing where the story goes. I definitely had a lot of fun with it, and if you are somebody who maybe has kids and you like to buddy read stuff with your kids, I think this would be a really fun one. I think that'd be really fun. I'm just waiting for the day that my nieces, one of them especially likes to read, I'm just like waiting for the day that they just get to that point where they're reading stuff, because I'm like, I can't wait to recommend you stuff. Anyway, that's unrelated to all of you, but that's it though for some new fantasy releases. As I said at the beginning, I will have all of these in the description bar down below in case you'd like to check any of them out for yourself. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.